Hi, and welcome back to a history of saps, blackjacks, and slungshots. So now we can get into the slungshots. I've been working through my collection chronologically, right? So you've had indications of like 1800s, maybe even earlier weapons. This one fits right in. This is the first true slungshot. We saw kind of a hybrid before. And this was as nefarious as anything in our weapons family. In fact, there was a newspaper from Iowa in 1861 that had a great line. It finished off an article and it said, "A man who carries a slungshot to a private party or anywhere else is a devil not to be tolerated in society." There was also a kind of serialized crime story from the 19th century where there was a female gang leader, and they did have those. And she had two thugs, and one was named Dirk, as in dagger, and the other Slungshot. So both of those incidents should give you an idea of how polite society viewed these. This was definitely a tool that a rowdy would carry, a roughneck, someone that was not going to be looked at as a productive member of society by any stretch. Now, these, just like saps and blackjacks, they were carried by cops, not as much as far as I can tell, and that is very hard to tell, though. So let's take a look here. Here you can get an idea. See that free swinging connection that we talked about? I mean, look how loosely and freely that swings. That's what makes these very devastating, right? It's going to accelerate as much as possible when swung, which is not something you can actually say about all our other weapons. And the other thing is they can be quite long, at least for, what we're terming as pocket clubs. You see that handle there? You can grab it by the very, very end, and that's just going to give you more room for it to swing and more impact. So for comparison's sake, let's take a look at the last slungshot that we've seen, the closest thing to a true one. You can see the rope, so this is a true slungshot in that way, but again, it's kind of like a conventional sap on the end of a rope, so it's a little bit more of a hybrid. And notice that it's a little bit stiffer, even though it swings freely. You couldn't pull this up in a pocket the way you could the one we're looking at in this video. Now, I mentioned the maritime origin of the slungshot, so that makes it a sibling to the bosun's kosh here, which we saw in a previous video. Two very different weapons, but they came from the exact same group of people, and at the same time, we're talking about sailors in the 17 and 1800s. Feature-wise, then, this provides more reach, more power, but less recoverability, if you will. So, martial arts nerding out here for a moment. You swing with this, and if you miss, it's going to want to continue traveling on its arc. You can't get that going back very quickly. Anyone real familiar with weapons knows that, flexible weapons are more difficult to use. They're just harder to handle because you've got to deal with that kind of swinging momentum. You've got to maintain your momentum. Once it's lost, it's lost. Here's my baseline sap that we've seen so much, and it's not the case with this one. If you miss, you just immediately, go from a forehand to a backhand instantly, like with a tennis racket. You can't do that with this weapon here, with the slungshot. So there's pros and cons to it, but it was very popular because of those pros. Here's another one, another conventional sap. And interestingly, this is a 20th century sap, but it's very similar to ones that were used at the exact same time as the slungshot. And again, you saw that springing back and forth. You don't have any of that with this weapon here. And we talked in my original video about how all of our weapons can be hard or soft loaded. That includes slungshots like this, although slungshots were, I'm going to say, almost always hard loaded, and this one definitely is. There's a big ball of lead in there. This is a devastating sap. This guy here, whoever designed this, was not fooling around. This one would be absolutely lethal with just one swing if it hits in the right spot. This is one of the heavier ones I have, and again, the increased momentum would just be really, really dangerous. This was nothing to play around with by any stretch. We talked about how a lot of ours were maybe favored with law enforcement because you could put a suspect down without doing too much damage. This would not be one of those. This was for someone who was not overly concerned with what happened to the person that they struck. So we're going to bring this guy back. There's just a reminder of the construction. So you can see how different these two are in terms of construction, but they're essentially the same weapon, right? Because they are slungshots. You can see them side by side. The motion's going to be very similar. The way you apply it is going to be the same. The impact it delivers is going to be very different with one versus the other. Much more concentrated delivery with the one we're talking about here today. So the one in the foreground, the rope-based one, I would say is more indicative of kind of the original slungshots, right? More sailorly, rope, not based. And then the one above, the one we're talking about today, that'd be more indicative of kind of like Slungshot 2.0. Once they really caught on land, which they absolutely did, then that's a little bit more like what you'd see. There's a lot of variety. I'm not saying they'd be leather loops as handles, but the fact that it's got the all-leather construction, you can see where it's kind of broken its connection to the sea. And they look big on screen. They are, as far as our subject goes. They're not actually. And like I mentioned earlier, the thing about the one we're examining today is you could really just ball that up if you want. Just ball it up, stick it in your pocket, and still be able to unleash it pretty quickly. You could have the loop sticking out of the pocket, so it's ready for a quick draw, but kind of a unique feature of a true slungshot like this one here is the way you can just completely ball them up. This one, like I mentioned, it's a monster. A lot of slungshots you'd be able to ball up in your fist with the handle slash loop included, and it could just sit there ready to go and lash out instantly. Look at that length there. See, I like sticking the pinky in there for that extra bit of retention, but right there, that shows you this thing is really going to develop a wide arc, again, as far as our weapons go. I've talked many times about how odd these are, and here's just another good indication of it. Someone who did not know what this is would, I think, have very little idea of what they're looking at here. It also looks like this one was used quite a bit. I don't mean used like, against people, although it could have been, but carried for sure, because that's really thick leather that loop is made out of, and you can see where it's almost frayed there towards the base, which I think is interesting. One more oddity about this one here is the shape of the load there. It's very bullet shaped, but it looks like an egg, basically, and I can't think of one other example I've seen that has exactly that. So it's interesting. I wonder if the maker started with some kind of large weight that happened to be that shape and then decided to use that, and that's why it resulted. I mean, I doubt somebody would have gone to the trouble of making it in that shape on purpose for just no particular reason, but that's a standout. I don't know what that's about. It looks interesting, though. And lastly, I just want to do a little bit of a compare, right? Here's the two tails, if you recall. So it's going to swing. It's a slungshot, essentially, but much smaller, especially when you choke up on it. And it's much more complicated if you remember the details of the construction up there on the load, the striking portion. And then we've got the pocket sap. And these tend to go from least devastating, this one here, to most, because we have a truly soft load with a flat shape. Then in the middle, we have kind of a semi-hard load. It's kind of chunky metal. And then lastly, we have, this Easter egg skull crusher, essentially. So that is the leather slungshot. Thanks.